This is Dan Bolen. I'm the host of the podcast, The Courage to Be Courageous. This is a place where all can come and to be able to hear people from all over the United States who have faced their fear and maybe even had some hidden secrets and had the courage to walk through their fear and become their authentic self. And all of them have reached a point in their life where I believe they're authentically happy and peaceful. We have a wonderful guest today. I'd like to introduce you to Jim Hoyt. And Jim is going to tell us a little about his story. He has a fascinating story, and one I think many of us can relate to, particularly if we've had some religious background and have been religiously involved. I think it's a powerful story. So Jim, welcome to my podcast. And let's talk a little bit about your background and how you became a Catholic priest and how you knew that you were going to serve in the ministry, seminary ministry, at a very early age. So tell us a little about how that developed.
Right. Well, a little bit about myself is I am the eldest of six siblings, and I was raised in the most southwest corner of Chicago. My dad was a city fireman, and my mom was a homemaker, and I had an excellent life. Knew that I was loved, I was provided for, I was cared for, and so that was a very, very strong part of my life. Is my family of origin, and that two qualities that were very important that were really not talked about, but were done more through example. The first being work ethic, and we were raised with a very, very strong work ethic. We had chores, we had Saturday Father and Sundays where we're taking down storm windows, washing them, putting up screens, a variety of different things. And so my dad, being a city fireman, and he was also a butcher on his days off from the fire department, really was very formative in my life of knowing that I had contributions, or I needed to make a contribution to society. The other thing is education. My dad dropped out of school in early high school to begin working. He was the youngest boy out of 10 siblings. He had three sisters that were younger than him, and so while his brothers were off at war and that, it was necessary for him to start working, and so he did not complete his high school education. But to this day, I knew that when we graduated from high school, that you go to college, and neither of my parents had that experience, and I never once ever questioned that once you complete high school, you don't go to college. Education was a very important piece in my background and in my life. We sat down to dinner every night. My mom was an outstanding cook, and the table became a place, a safe harbor to be able to discuss what's going on in our lives, what we're dealing with, and also a place for us to share dreams with one another. And so that's another very formative piece of mine that I've taken through into my adult life. When I graduated from grade school, I went into the high school seminary. When I was in around fifth grade, I had discerned that I wanted to become a Catholic priest, and so we had a high school seminary in Chicago. I graduated from there and then went on to Niles College of Loyola University, which was the Archdiocesan Seminary College for the Archdiocese of Chicago. I had great opportunities in school. I had a great network of friends, and service really became an integral part of my life, of being able to use my gifts and talents to be able to use that for the betterment of others. And also during that time, I had the opportunity to study Spanish. And so when I went to college, I was assigned to a parish where I would spend weekends and where I would spend the summers at, kind of interning and running programs in that. And so the community where I was at for 3 years was Puerto Rican, Mexican, and Cuban. And so it was a very, very strong influence. And so I was able to really get a command of the Spanish language and be able to enter into the community's life. When I came to my senior year of college in the seminary, I started discerning, going on to the major seminary, which would be another 4 years. But it was always my desire to be a dad, to have a family. And there was going to be no way that that was going to be possible being in the seminary. And so I decided not to go on in the major seminary. That was in 1977. And Loyola University of Chicago is run by the Jesuit order of Catholic priests. And they had missions down in Peru, in Lima, in Arequipa, and in Tacna. And so we wrote to a couple of them, and they invited us to come down, that they accepted us to come down as volunteers, a friend Mike and myself. And so it was one of the most rewarding experiences in my life. I still dream that I'm in Peru. I dream that I'm with families, with students. I dream that I'm eating Peruvian food. It's just it was the best of self-discovering, that of learning who I was as a person, of being able to see the differences between living in the United States and living in Peru, especially at that time, because Peru was a military government, which explained why there were tanks and soldiers on the airfield when we landed in Peru for the first time. The task that we had there was working in what was called the Pueblos Jóvenes, which were the very poor communities where people actually built their homes out of rocks and then took corrugated metal and put that over the rocks with a couple of rocks on top,
Mm-hmm.
and that was home for them, and a dirt floor. And so I would say that they were mostly 10 by 10, and there were families of 8 people that would live in a space like that. And also delivering food and clothing through Caritas, which was a Catholic relief organization. And then I taught high school at Colegio San Jose, which was the Jesuit high school. So in the work that I was doing, I not only was working in the high school with the wealthiest of Peru, but I was working and living in the Pueblos Jóvenes with the poorest of the poor. And so that really started to create in me an interest, a questioning of the difference between wants and needs. And I thought that that was an extremely important piece to be able to see that not everything in the United States is perfect, not everything's bad, but to be able to look for solutions that favored social justice and discrimination.
And
Go ahead, Deacon.
oh no, I was thinking, was it during that time that you met your wife, Tricia?
Yes, it was. So I decided not to go on to stay in Peru for another 2 years. And while I was there, I met Tricia, who was a volunteer and then a teacher in the school that I was. She was a volunteer from Ireland, and we became immediate close friends right off the bat. As time went on, it started to become that we were more like brother and sister, and she would go out with guys who I would say that they are losers, dump them, and I would go out with girls, and she'd say they're gum-smacking bimbos. So neither of us ever approved of who the other person was going out with.
So
But,
then you decided to marry her, since
yes, exactly. It was one day I just said, when are we going to come to the conclusion that we're meant for one another? And it was always my dream to be able to have a family. And I really felt that Tricia's intelligence, her passion, her compassion were outstanding elements that I wanted to be part of my life on an ongoing basis. In terms of my sexuality at the time, so we're talking now that I'm around 23, 24, I was very inexperienced. Although I had dated, I had never um, uh, 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 had intercourse or that. Um, I I was attracted to women, but I also found an interest in men, and so I tried to stifle and curb that side of me, and got married. Um, we moved to Phoenix and we had four children, Christopher, Melissa, Michael, and Rebecca. And we had the four of them within a 5 year period.
Oh
So really,
my.
we had the children so quickly that we didn't even know what happened. They were, by the time we said stop the production line, we had already had four, you know. And in fact, I had gone to a conference in Chicago and Trish dropped me at the airport and then called me on Father's Day and said happy birthday from the four children. And that was how I found out that we had our fourth and final daughter. Uh,
Now, during that time that you met Tricia and you had the four children, uh, you had then become a deacon in the Catholic Church. Is that correct?
no, it's a little further on.
It is further on.
I
Okay.
started, yes. So I started my career working in real estate and construction, and I was doing that relocating people that were being moved by the government uh, for airport expansion, and also worked with the Tonganese community, I'm sorry, the Laotian community, who at the time were uh, coming in coming into the Phoenix area through the replacement program. And so I worked with that, and then I had the opportunity to work as an administrator in the church.
Okay.
And I started doing that, but the beginning years, the first 4 years were filled with a lot of hardship. As I mentioned, that I was the oldest of six siblings. When I was around 9 years old, um, I lost a sister who was stillborn, and then I lost another sister, Karen, at the age of 6 months due to spina bifida. And so there was a lot of kind of loss that was felt in our
A
home,
lot of tragedy, yes.
you know, as right while we were young. And then our son Christopher was 10 months old, and my two younger brothers, one was 25 at the time, Bill, and Michael was 18, had gone up skiing to northern Arizona. And on their way home, a state snowplow hit their car, and they were killed instantly. So death has
Oh
really
my.
been kind of death and resurrection was really very much a part of my family. And my parents were faith was very very strong, and the notion of a church community to be able to support you in times of loss was revealed to us through the community that we belong to. But there was a saying that my mom said the night that we found out that my two brothers were killed. And she said, at least there isn't a single thing that I needed to say to my boys that I already didn't say to them. So that was another lesson that I
Wow.
learned, and that you never know if there's a tomorrow. And so whatever you say, you need to say it today because there's no promise of tomorrow. And so in sharing feelings, emotions, and that, we came from a very, very forth-telling family in that. So I then started working as a church administrator, and I did that for 10 years. I was in charge of human resources, development, personnel, facilities, and did that at a community in Mesa. And while I was there, a couple people in the community tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know, we think that you should consider being a permanent deacon in the church. So a permanent deacon is one who has to be 35 years of age. If they're married at the time, they can remain married. But if they were to divorce or if the wife was to die, you would not be able to marry again. You took the vow of celibacy
Interesting.
following
Wow.
that.
Hmm.
So I became a deacon, and my diaconal ministry, besides being doing the kind of lay temporal things of the church brought me into working with life issues, with ecumenical dialogue, and in a big way with social justice. And during that time, I then moved to another church where I was at for another 10 years. And as a deacon, I never preached or really spoke on the stance of the Catholic Church on active homosexuals, basically because I did not agree with that, and that my voice, once you're ordained, I'm not speaking as an individual any longer, but I'm speaking on behalf of the Catholic Church. And so since I didn't agree with that, I just always avoided having to discuss or talk about that, mainly because the church's stance is that homosexuals, if they are active, are considered morally and intrinsically disordered. And I never, yes. And I had learned from early on that I was made in the image of God. So, how can gay people be intrinsically disordered if they're a child of God? And so it was through that I never really believed the stance of the church, but kept that to myself since I knew what my role was and what I was able to speak on and what I wasn't able to speak on.
So my question is this: during this time that you were having these feelings and you didn't agree with them, you kept it inside. So did you know at that point, Jim, at that time that you were gay? Or I think you and I talked about it. I used the word bisexual because I had obviously had a child with women, and it was easier for me to accept that than to think I was gay. Where were you at in your life at that time as far as your feelings toward men? Was it starting to crop up a little bit for you?
It was. Not only was those feelings cropping up, but so was my alcohol consumption at that time. And I finally came to the point that I knew that I had to stop drinking, that it was affecting me personally, it was affecting my health, it was affecting me emotionally, it was affecting my family. And other than that, outside of that, people in the community or that didn't see that. I was kind of done at home and stayed within the house. But I definitely had feelings of attraction to men and Trisha at the time. And as I became sober, and I'm 23 years sober now, those feelings of attraction to men became more pronounced. I started coming to the conclusion that I think that my alcohol consumption was increasing because I was numbing the feeling of dealing with my sexuality. And so going ahead and numbing myself in that just I didn't have to deal with it on a regular daily basis. But once I became sober and these feelings became more and more, then I started to become overcome by fear and anxiety. As my attraction became stronger, my fear of losing Trisha, my children, and the ministry in the church could all go in one fair swoop. And those were the most important things in my life. And so
Yes.
I protected those still, while dealing still with this attraction towards men. And I finally started working for an international nonprofit in Latin America and the Caribbean for 15 years. And while I was down there 9 years ago on one of my visits, our international office was in Cuernavaca, Mexico. I was sitting in a coffee shop on my laptop, and there was a younger man that was sitting at another table, and our eyes caught one another, and I smiled and he smiled, and so we started talking. And I had found out that this young man, whose name was Joel, was gay. And the long and short of it is, I had sexual relations with him on that day. I did 2 more times during that week, and this just threw my life into chaos. First of all, Joel is 30 years younger than I am, and so what am I doing with someone so young? And his response back was, "It's only a number. It doesn't mean anything to me." And we talked about what a life would look like with one another. And me being in the States and him being in Mexico, he was working for the ministry, the state of Morelos Ministry of Culture, and he said, "Well, would you consider moving here?" And I said, "Well, my children and all that are in the States. Would you consider coming here?" And so, after 3 months, my feelings were so strong for Joel, and there was such intimacy that took place in our relationship. And Trish and I never had the intimacy that I experienced with Joel because I was always hiding a shadow side of myself.
Right, you get that, and
so
there's a lot of guilt and shame that goes with that when you're doing that because
yes.
And
shame is a very Catholic word also.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I did experience or I was fearful of that. And so I finally, after a couple months, made the decision to be with Joel and felt that if I did not move on this, I felt that I would end up being a very bitter and angry man. At the same time, I never felt that I was able to love Tricia in the way that I felt that she deserved to be loved. And while I don't want to sound so that the only reason I did this was to be able to release, Tricia and my vow of marriage, but it was also that that she could be able to move forward with her life in a way that she felt was more honest and authentic for her. And so we divorced. It was rather quick, and in 3 months after I met Joel, he moved to the United States. He soon after got he came in on a tourist visa, then got a student visa and studied at Phoenix College, English as a second language, and then started to do his associate's degree there. And then went on to Arizona State University and got his bachelor's in family and human development. And during the 9 years, they've been the best of my life. But I want to go back to when I had my conversation with Tricia and my children about coming out and my desire to be with Joel.
I think that was when you wanted to get divorced. Wasn't that September or 2014?
It was November of 2014.
November 2014.
Right. I told her earlier than that.
In September, right.
When Joel came in November, that is then when we separated and filed for divorce. And the whole thing of unfaithfulness never sat well with me. I knew that when I took the vows of marriage that it was until death do us part, and that that I had vowed to be faithful to her. And because I was not and had the sexual relationship with Joel, it was difficult for me to live with that shame of being unfaithful. In this process, not only did I find the courage to be courageous, but my family found the courage to be courageous. Joel moved here, and I asked Tricia around a week later, "Would you like to meet Joel?" And she says, "No, I saw a picture of him on Facebook, and he's too attractive." She says, "Let me lose a little weight, and then I'll meet him."
Okay.
So around 2 weeks later, we were driving in the car, and she asked me if I could pick something up, and I said, "Well, Joel's in the car." And she goes, "Well, I haven't gotten around to dieting, and I don't know when I will. Go ahead and bring him by, and I'll meet him." And Tricia was very protective of me with Joel and with my children, that she told him that she loved us very much and that she wanted him to be able to take care of us and not to to jerk us around or whatever else were there. But Trisha was very, very courageous at a number of times. Around 2 weeks after Joel moved here, all of my adult children were coming back for Thanksgiving with their families. And in the beginning, I asked, and none of them, prior to their arrival, were interested in meeting with Joel. They just said, "Dad, we will down the line, but right now it's still too raw for us." And I respected that, and I said, "Okay." So one night, while all of my children were at the house with Trisha, I went by to pick something up, and Joel was in the car. And I said to my daughter, she was going to the airport to pick up her husband and son. And I said, "Joel is out there." I said, "Let me go out and I'll leave, and then you can come out and go to the airport." When Trisha heard me tell them that Joel was outside, she said, "Oh, I didn't know he was out there. Let me go out and say hello." And what spawned was that my one daughter turned to my other daughter and said, "Well, if Mom's talking to him, why aren't we talking to him?" And the next thing, my daughters were outside talking and meeting Joel. And in fact, the next day we went to breakfast, my two daughters and Joel and myself. And it was really turned out to be more of a grand inquisition rather than really a dialogue that my two daughters, all four of my children and Trish and myself are completely fluent in Spanish. And so, and Joel's English was very limited at the time. And so my oldest daughter, Melissa, said, "So tell us, what are your intentions with our father?" And he says, "Well," he said, "your dad and I met," he said, "and I know that he loves you very much." And he said, "And we very much want to be together, and we're hoping that you can be part of that." And it was an excellent conversation for around a year and a half of really being able to. Joel talked about his desire wasn't to live in the United States. Many people think that everybody from Mexico wants to live in the U.S. That was not his desire, but that he moved here because he knew that I wanted to be with my children. And so it was courageous on their part to meet him for the first time, only 2 weeks after he moved here. Over the years, three of my children live outside the state of Arizona. And so we have gone and spent holidays and we've spent vacations and that with my children since then. And that my natural children and their spouses and their children have all embraced us. And so one of the things that my son Christopher said at the time is, "Well, what's important," this was on Thanksgiving Day, "what's important is that we just need to learn to be family in a different way than we've been before." And I thought that was a courageous thing to say that, I mean, at the time he was 31 years old and, all of my other children were looking to him for kind of guidance as to, how's this going to go and move forward in that. And that, it wasn't that, well, we're not going to be family anymore, but it was rather that it's going to be different than it was. And how are we going to move forward and grow and learn and love from the new reality that we're experiencing? And my in-laws, my mother-in-law and father-in-law are deceased, but I have 4 brother-in-laws and a sister-in-law in Ireland, and all of them reached out to me after Trisha told them about what had taken place in that. And all of them told me that they loved me and that I was still, included. In fact, I'm on the family chat. I've gone to weddings in Ireland. I'm still on the invitation list. And that's courageous on their part.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
To someone who hurt their sister that much still had the ability to love me for who I was and the decision that I made. And so I had to be courageous knowing and making this decision that I was no longer going to be able to be a deacon. And my diaconal ministry was critical. I was 20 years a deacon. I had been instrumental in people's lives, in the at times when they were dying, at times when I was baptizing their children, at times when they were being married, and that I was no longer able to celebrate the sacraments as I did before. And so I had to write a letter not only to our bishop, but also to Pope Francis, asking that I no longer be a deacon and that I be returned to what's called the clerical state or laicized, meaning that I'm no longer a cleric. And that was a painful experience for me to go through. And I had a great relationship with our pastor. And on the last Sunday that I was on the altar with him, his comment was, he said, "Well, Jim," he says, "your departure from the church is a very sad day for us." And it was very affirming for me, knowing that he saw and appreciated the way that I was able to enter into people's lives and bring the presence of Christ through those different sacraments or through the different life events that they were experiencing. And then the one thing that I did not anticipate is that I was fired from my employment.
Oh, wow.
I had worked for an organization. We had orphanages in 9 Latin American and Caribbean countries for 15 years. I was bringing down groups and donors in that on mission trips to be able to support the homes in that. And
do you think they fired you because you were gay?
That is the only thing that I can say. When I asked why I was being fired, the CEO said to me that Arizona is a state at will, and that employment at will, and that he didn't have to give me a reason. But that was a very, very painful piece because, I felt that there was no real closure or way of ending 15 years of my life and being so dedicated. And my work with the orphan and abandoned children was not a job; it was a vocation for me. It was part of who I was as a person, as a life, and I gave myself freely in that experience, and I was very blessed for it. They were great years. I loved going to work in that, but there was just I wasn't allowed a way to be able to decently exit the situation where I could have turned in a resignation and just said, okay, I can see how this might be difficult, because we did fundraise in Catholic churches and that, and so it might be difficult for me to be able to continue in the role that I am. But it was just the door was slammed and shut and ended. So,
I think
the courage.
I think that made me think of something we talked about yesterday that ties in with this. I think Joel was on his way coming from Mexico, and Jim was there with no job, no severance, no insurance, and was dismissed. That had to take courage to get through that. Tell me how you did that.
Well, I worked with a priest, pastor for probably 15 years, and his one of the things I learned from him is that if the process is clean, the outcome's clean. And so I knew that I needed to be very focused in this and not become overly emotional with this experience that was really very painful for me to deal with. And so 2 of my children at the time actually worked for the organization, and they both asked me whether they should terminate their positions. And I said, absolutely not. I said, you'd be hurting the children that we serve and no one other than that. So I encouraged them to be able to stay in the employment there. And then I had a number of people that were friends of mine that that had said that they were going to quit donating and that, and I asked them not to stop donating. That I was hoping that they were donating for the right reasons, and that was to be able to help these young children be able to get educated and become healthy citizens in their communities, in their countries. And so it was really a thing of uh, being able to stay very focused on myself and not let anger consume me. Uh, actually, the firing occurred on a Wednesday, and Joel was arriving to the U.S. on Thursday. So here I was
Oh,
moving out of the house into an apartment and having Joel arrive, and I have no job. Which, if you know me well enough, that I'm that would being gainfully employed is and having that strong work ethic was a huge part of who I was. But what Joel, when I told him what happened and that, his comment to me was, he said, Jim, he said, I love you. And he said, and I believe in you, and we will be all right. He said, if it means that we don't have a place to stay and we have to stay and live out, like outside on the streets in one of those bus stops, then we'll do that. And number one, that really kind of told me how much he loved me and how much he believed in
of
me.
course, yeah.
But it came that I never lost my faith in God. You know,
Hmm.
I I look my I look at it as people when they do when they go mountain climbing, they don't um, uh, secure their stakes around a branch or around a rock, but rather they secure it firmly in the mountain. And that's how my faith was. Is that my faith was in God and not in people.
Hmm.
And that if I was to become angry with God over something, people, places, and things are always going to disappoint us. But a firm foundation in God was rock solid, and I believe that that's what allowed me and enabled me to gracefully move through this experience. Now, at the same time, I'm going through the thing of people in the community finding out of, that I was no longer a deacon, that I was no longer working with the organization with orphaned and disadvantaged children, and uh, and they couldn't believe that I wasn't with Trisha because Trisha and I didn't separate because we didn't get along. It was a thing over sexuality. It wasn't a thing at all that we didn't love one another. I still love her to this day. Quite frankly, if I could have figured out how I could have a blended family of Trisha and Joel, I would have tried to do that because I love them both so much. So I
That's
when uh, I, the lessons that I learned through this, Dan, is that when I encountered people who started abandoning me or deserting me, is that my sexuality was such a small part of who I was. My when I went in, I was at the hospital with a family who just lost a family member, someone died, or I was at a house with a crisis intervention and that. It wasn't Jim the homosexual or Jim the heterosexual that was there. It was Jim that was
Jim,
there.
the person, the authentic person.
Yes,
Yes,
right. Yes, exactly.
I get that.
And
Yeah.
that I yes, I changed a little bit in terms of my sexual preference, but I did not. It didn't change the man that I was and
Didn't
what I
change the
stood
core of
for.
who you were. Yes.
Exactly. And so therefore, I didn't feel that it should define me.
Well, let me
The
ask you a
fear,
question. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim. I didn't mean to.
the fear of what or who we don't. I think that a lot of uh, the discontinuing relationships or friendships with me was a thing out of fear. And I've come to really understand that fear is when we don't know what's out there, when we don't, that if we don't know gay people, and we don't embrace them, then we, I'm going to go back and repeat this part, okay, Dan? That what I learned is that uh, fear alienates us from others. And that fear is normally because we find that someone or something is different than we are. And that I became more understanding and more compassionate to people who chose not to continue to be in relationship with me. And so that was one of my lessons learned.
I think
And
also this idea of fear, because even in my podcast, I define it as false evidence that appears real. And the difference is we run from the fear instead of embrace the fear and use the courage to get through that. And I'm going to keep stating that a number of times because that's the whole reason for this podcast is having people understand when you run from fear. I always say it doesn't go away. What it does, it gets bigger. It does push-ups outdoor and the push-ups outside, and it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. You have to embrace it. Understand that it is false evidence, but it appears real to you, and then you have to say, how can I embrace courage to be able to get through the fear and not run from the fear? And I think that's a key point. I want to also conclude here on our podcast because Jim made some incredible points. I want to know where you're at today, if you're at peace with yourself, if you're happy with yourself, and what comments would you make to others that are struggling as you and I both have struggled with ourselves? What comments would you like to make that will be helpful for them? Because we did walk through our fear. And we may have had some losses. I certainly had losses, and I'm sure you did too as well. We know you did. So what type of comments would you like to make today for people who are running from the fear and how they can get the courage to be able to get through the fear?
right. I know as a person that in walking through that fear and having Hoel and having Trisha, my former wife, and my children and close friends, that I knew that I was going to be all right. And what it started, once I knew that everything was going to be all right, I really started moving to the point of embracing that for once now at the age of 59, I am finally living an honest and authentic life.
Mm-hmm.
That, the shadows that I
Key
had
point.
before are not going into each relationship that I have with me. But now this is who I am. This is what I am. And so that authentic life has really given me the opportunity to love who I am. I I love who I am, even out of all of that loss or whatever. I'm now 67 years old. I I'm the best of who I've ever been. If you were to ask Trisha and you would ask my children, she would say that I'm a better person today than I was before. I think that with that, I've become more peaceful in life. I'm more patient. I was very much a perfectionist and always wanted a clean house. And I used to say to my kids, I'd call them before I'd leave work and say that I wanted the kitchen immaculate. And so today now I hear them with their children telling them to clean their room immaculate. But I think that you really got to love yourself intimately to really then be able to let that flow into the rest of your life. And so I think that now my love for Joel, my love for family, my love for the friends that I have is truly a embracing, encompassing one. The people have said to me, oh, I'm so sorry that you lived a miserable life until you were 59. I lived a blessed life. I I could not have been more happy and more fulfilled with the life that I had with Trisha and my children. However, I don't think that I was bringing my authentic self to the bedroom with Trisha.
Good
And
point.
that's something that's painful for me. I have apologized to Trisha numerously throughout the years, and she has asked me to stop beating myself up. She said, you're where you are today. I'm fine. The kids are fine, and we'll move forward. And so that's been the thing is that that for someone who might be in the situation that I was in before, you know, if you've got to just walk through that fear, you know, um, uh, that fear can isolate us, it can immobilize us, it can paralyze us. But we're we're designed to be free people. That's free will was one of the greatest gifts that God gave us. And so finally in my life, I'm able to exercise that free will and love authentically.
That's a very, very powerful point. I want to share two things that I wrote down, and I had Jim repeat these to me twice yesterday, that I think are real key points for people to take away from this podcast, because Jim's children struggled with him being unfaithful to Trish, but Trish made a comment. If your father had never met Joel, he would never come to grips with the person who would make him happy. And did I get that correct?
Yes, yes. She, you know, something would have been wrong with our parenting if my kids were not upset because I was unfaithful.
Right.
So was I upset with my kids that they were upset because I was unfaithful? Absolutely not. Those are the morals that we taught our children with. But I think what Trisha did is she opened that, that without this experience of being unfaithful, that I would never have known what really I was looking for, what was really going to make me my authentic self. And I thought that was such a powerful, powerful statement when Trisha said that. It really, for me, defined how much she really loves me.
Absolutely. And here's another quote I want to give from Jim as well that he and I talked about yesterday. He said, "You need to be gentle with ourselves, true to ourselves. There's only two people we have to be true to. We need to be true to ourselves and true to God." And I think that's a great way to be able to end that. Such a powerful statement there. And I think you all have been getting, my listeners have appreciated the courage that Jim has had. He's had an exciting life, not without pain, but he's been able to have the courage to be courageous. So thank you so much, Jim, for being on my podcast today. And we'll look forward to seeing you very, very soon. Take care, my friend.
Dan, can I just close with one thing?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. I was looking for something that might speak to the courage to be courageous. And I came across a speech that Robert Kennedy gave at the University of Cape Town, South Africa on June 6, 1966. And this was really the time when civil rights, gay rights, all of that was in the center, and there was such division regarding that. But Robert Kennedy said, "At the heart of Western freedom and democracy is the belief that the individual man, the child of God, is the touchstone of value, and all society, all groups, and states exist for that person's benefit. Therefore, the enlargement of liberty for individual human beings must be the supreme goal and the abiding practice of any society." And that is my hope, is that perhaps through the words that we've shared today, through people being able to read your book, to being able to reach out to someone in your community that might be gay and alienated, that through one of those experiences that you are able to contribute to the supreme goal of really being able to provide true liberty, true authenticity for our brothers and sisters that still struggle.
Wow. I can't close any better than that, Jim. Thank you so much for bringing that comment up. Well, we appreciate Jim Hoyt being able to share his story with us. Thank you, Jim, again. And that is a powerful comment. I'm going to do some thinking on that comment. That is a powerful comment, and thank you for sharing that with us. You guys, hope our listeners have enjoyed this, and we'll see you next time on our podcast, The Courage to be Courageous.